Iran made a huge mistake, as its regime flails wildly, striking out at every ally that the US has while Operation Epic Fury bombs its military into oblivion. Iran has targeted a UK base. What was the UK's response? It's sending something massive to the Arabian Sea, and this is the last kind of surprise that Iran wants. Something nuclear is coming Iran's way, and it's a nightmare for a regime that is already on its last legs. Of course, that regime doesn't want you to know that it's struggling. That's what led to its crazy decision to strike the Diego Garcia base. At least it's a crazy decision when taking into account just how damaged Iran's military infrastructure has become. In terms of Iran's efforts to defend itself against the US and its overwhelming air power, the strike makes some sense. After the UK gave the US permission to use its bases during Operation Epic Fury, Diego Garcia became a major problem for Iran's regime. One of a group of approximately 60 islands scattered throughout the Chagos archipelago, Diego Garcia has been a joint UK and US base since the mid-1960s. That isn't so much of a concern for Iran as the fact that the base is located about 4,000 kilometers or 2,500 miles away from the Iranian mainland, which means it allows the US to station long-range bombers and attack aircraft without having to force those airframes to engage in massive round trips from the US to Iran. In other words, Diego Garcia is a threat, and Iran tried to deal with it. On March 22nd, the UK confirmed that Iran has launched 2 of its ballistic missiles at Diego Garcia, CNBC reports. Neither of those missiles managed to hit their targets, as the UK Housing Secretary Steve Reed explains. Our assessment is that the Iranians certainly targeted Diego Garcia. As we understand it, one missile fell short, failed. The other was intercepted and prevented, he is reported as telling the BBC. Reed went on to claim that there is no specific assessment that suggests that Iran is actively targeting the UK, which implies that Iran intended to strike against the US assets on Diego Garcia. But what Reed says and how the UK actually feels about this attempted attack are two very different things. There are even signs that some in the UK do indeed feel that it was a direct attack against its territory. The UK's Defence Ministry takes a much more critical view of what Iran tried to pull in its response to the ballistic missile launches, stating, "Iran's reckless attacks, lashing out across the region and holding hostage the Strait of Hormuz, are a threat to British interests and British allies." And in the UK press, articles are starting to appear, including one published by the BBC on March 23rd, that asks the question of whether Iranian ballistic missiles are capable of reaching London. For what it's worth, Al Jazeera reports that Iran has denied responsibility for the attack. The outlet reports that an Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson named Esmail Baghai has already claimed that the missile attack was a false flag operation, and that it may have been Israel that was behind the attack. Iran has also previously claimed that it has purposefully limited the range of its ballistic missiles to 2,000 kilometers, or about 1,240 miles, which will put Diego Garcia well out of their range. However, we have to wonder if this denial has come because the attack failed. If the ballistic missiles fired at Diego Garcia had hit their targets, jubilation and more threats from Iran would have confirmed their real source. The UK isn't having any of them. And talk of a false flag has been dismissed by the UK, which has said unequivocally that Iran is behind the whole thing. It doesn't matter that the missiles launched at Diego Garcia failed to hit their targets. What actually matters is the intent behind those launches. And it's that intent that will have the UK feeling concerned. After all, what we see in the Diego Garcia attack is Iran following on from its warnings after the UK reversed its decision to prevent the US from using any UK bases as part of Operation Epic Fury. Tensions had been rising. And Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi spoke to his UK counterpart Yvette Cooper about the UK's decision. These actions will definitely be considered as participation in aggression and will be recorded in the history of relations between the two countries. At the same time, we reserve our inherent right to defend the country's sovereignty and independence, Araghchi claims to have said during the call, per Time magazine. Those words were published by Time on March 20th. 2 days later, Iranian missiles were flying toward Diego Garcia. That's when the situation escalated from warnings to action. But what Iran didn't expect was that the UK had gotten ahead of it all. Weeks before the Iranian missiles flew and Araghchi's warning was being blared, the UK had been putting itself into a position where it could respond to any serious threat that it sees from Iran at a moment's notice. Iran went ballistic, but the UK has already gone nuclear powered. Proving that it's far from helpless when it comes to dealing with Iran's threats and its ballistic missile launches, the UK has sent something stealthy, lethal, and nuclear-powered in Iran's direction. The HMS Anson is already in the Arabian Sea, and as tensions rise between the UK and Iran, it's ready to strike at a moment's notice if it's called upon. According to Marine Insight, the HMS Anson, which is one of the UK's most modern nuclear-powered submarines, left Perth, Australia to head to the Arabian Sea at right about the same time as the UK gave permission to the US to start using bases like Diego Garcia in Operation Epic Fury. This was the UK getting ahead of the potential issues that the decision could cause. The HMS Anson has sailed over 8,800 kilometers, or about 5,500 miles, to reach the Arabian Sea, and it presents a massive counter-threat to everything that Iran is trying to pull with its ballistic missile. Why? A quick look at the submarine's specifications tells you all you need to know. The HMS Anson is an Astute-class submarine, and according to the Royal Navy, it's the fifth of its class, following on from the HMS Astute, Ambush, Artful, and Audacious. Alliterative naming conventions aside, these types of submarines come loaded with US-made Tomahawk land attack missiles, which you'll find out soon could well play a role if the UK moves from deploying its sub to actively using it in combat, along with Spearfish heavyweight torpedoes that make the HMS Anson a horror for an enemy's naval assets. Being a nuclear-powered submarine, the HMS Anson also has immense survivability and range. The onboard nuclear reactor keeps the submarine powered for as long as it needs, meaning the submarine won't need to refuel at any point during its 25-year service life. Cleverly, there are also water purification systems built into the submarine, meaning that the only real limiting factor on how long it can stay in the Arabian Sea is the amount of food that is on board. Oh, and by the way, the Diego Garcia base that Iran tried to hit has a deep water port that is perfect for submarines. So even if the food starts to run low on the HMS Anson, a restock is just a couple of thousand miles away. What this means is the HMS Anson can stay almost indefinitely in the Arabian Sea for as long as the UK needs it to be there, barring the odd trip to the military grocery store. Iran should definitely be worried that this submarine is sailing unseen in and around its waters. And it should be especially worrying that Marine Insight reports that the submarine has already been spotted several times surfacing so that it can communicate with the UK's permanent joint headquarters in London. The UK hasn't just sent a submarine and left it to do its thing. Communication is ongoing, and if Iran tries to do something like attack Diego Garcia again, it will only take a quick confirmation to attack from the UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer for the HMS Anson to start firing its Tomahawk missiles back at Iran. That gives you one clue as to what having this submarine in the Arabian Sea means for the UK in terms of its potential response to Iran's aggression against its bases. We're going to dig deeper into all of that in a moment, but before we do, you are watching The Military Show. If this is the kind of insight that you want to see, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel. Returning to the HMS Anson, the presence of this submarine in the Arabian Sea gives the UK an array of options for what to do next in Iran, assuming that it does anything at all. It may not have to. Iran, knowing that this submarine is lurking, could be enough to dissuade it from attempting many more strikes like the one that it tried on Diego Garcia. It's not like the UK is being especially secretive about the arrival of its nuclear-powered submarine. The government had announced the submarine's arrival in Australia toward the end of February, and it surfaced enough times since it went on the move for Iran to know that the sub is on the prowl. The UK has a pretty effective deterrent in place right now, though there's no telling what Iran's regime will do if Operation Epic Fury is protracted enough to make that regime more desperate than it already is. If the UK does decide that it needs to respond to what Iran is doing, the onboard Tomahawk missiles present as much of a threat as any of the ballistic missiles that Iran can launch at Diego Garcia. Perhaps even more of a threat, as the UK base clearly has competent air defenses in place, while Iran is dealing with the fact that at least 70% of its air defense network has been destroyed. Iran won't be able to do much if the HMS Anson starts firing off its Tomahawk missiles, and the UK is counting on that fact if it decides that it needs to start striking back against Iran's military assets. Army recognition notes that the Tomahawks loaded into HMS Anson have ranges exceeding 1,600 kilometers, or about 994 miles, so almost anywhere in Iran can be targeted if the UK chooses. Command centers, missile launch sites, naval bases, and command and control nodes can all be hit by these missiles, and the HMS Anson wouldn't have to even come close to Iran's coastal areas to launch its strikes. What the UK has here is basically a standoff threat that could, at any time, be combined with the immense amount of air power that the US and Israel have brought to the table. All it would take is intelligence being sent to the UK submarine, and a Tomahawk could be fired off without being detected against any Iranian target that the Allies want to hit. The only thing holding the submarine back in this regard is that it can carry a maximum of 38 munitions, split between Tomahawks and Spearfish torpedoes, depending on the mission requirements. That's enough for a handful of surgical strikes, but the submarine would need to be reloaded every so often. But again, Diego Garcia is within easy sailing distance. Perhaps every trip back for food could be accompanied by a new batch of Tomahawks that the UK can use to obliterate yet more Iranian military nodes. Maybe the UK isn't thinking about going quite that far. That decision will be made based on what Iran does next. In the meantime, the UK can keep the HMS Anson in the Arabian Sea because it's an extremely stealthy submarine, and Iran's navy has been ruined to the point where it would need an enormous slice of luck to find the submarine. The high-definition video systems the submarine uses for surveillance are a massive upgrade over the telltale periscopes used in older submarines. And with its tiny acoustic signature, it's not exactly easy for sonar to pick up on the submarine, even if an anti-submarine ship is sailing in approximately the same region. At all times, interesting engineering reports the precise location of the HMS Anson is only known by the UK Prime Minister and a very select group of senior naval commanders who are responsible for relaying orders and dictating where the sub goes. All of this matters because it's likely that the UK is currently using its stealthy submarine to monitor the ongoing situation in the Strait of Hormuz. That waterway has become one of the key talking points of Operation Epic Fury, as Iran has managed to successfully blockade the strait using a combination of drones, anti-ship missiles, and fast attack boats. All these combine to create such a dangerous risk profile that merchant ships, for the most part, simply aren't sailing through the strait that is usually responsible for 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas transit. That's where HMS Anson could come into play. We're unlikely to start seeing it fire off spearfish torpedoes at fast boats anytime soon, unless the UK decides to start escorting ships through the Strait of Hormuz. But what the submarine will be doing is sailing silently around the waters close to the Strait of Hormuz, monitoring everything that happens there and reporting it all back to the UK. Bear in mind where the submarine has been deployed. The Arabian Sea is south of Iran and Oman, and it opens up into the Indian Ocean. The Strait of Hormuz is so important because it connects the Persian Gulf to the very sea where the HMS Anson is sailing, which basically means that this one submarine can watch what goes in and comes out of the Persian Gulf. We mentioned earlier that the HMS Anson could strike coastal targets along the Strait of Hormuz without having to sail anywhere near within the range of the defenses that Iran has set up in those coastal regions. The same is true for this observation. If it's not going to be firing on enemy ships, food becomes the only limiting factor for the submarine's crew. Other than that, the HMS Anson can hang around, unseen, as it watches everything that happens in the strait. Intelligence could be gathered, perhaps about the makeshift ports from which Iran is sending its fast boats into the strait. The HMS Anson might also be able to observe military nodes in the coastal region, all of which is information that could be shared with the US and Israel in support of their airstrikes. And if the sub is called into combat, it's more than ready. Iran's fast boats have no answers for the HMS Anson's spearfish torpedoes. Iran's Kilo-class submarines are louder and less advanced, meaning the HMS Anson could track and strike them before their crews even know what's hit them. As for Iran's frigates and other warships, it's not like Iran has many of those left. The US claims that it has destroyed 100 Iranian naval vessels so far in Operation Epic Fury, and Iran has been relying on its asymmetric tactics in the Strait of Hormuz as its key naval strategy. We won't say that the HMS Anson has absolutely nothing to worry about from Iran's navy. However, it's stealthy enough to be able to sail, observe, and strike from the Arabian Sea practically at will, meaning it becomes an ever-looming threat that Iran has to consider in every future strike it might make against the UK. Still, one massive question remains. Does the arrival of the HMS Anson in the Arabian Sea mean that the UK is about to get directly involved in Operation Epic Fury? The UK certainly hasn't claimed that it's ready to get involved. Yes, it is allowing the US to use its bases, and one of its best submarines is sailing in and around Iran's territory. However, Starmer has so far been steadfast in his claims that the UK isn't going to become a part of the war. However, Starmer is saying all of this while also claiming that the UK mustn't fall into the false comfort that there will be a quick and early end to Operation Epic Fury. That could be interpreted as Starmer saying that the UK doesn't want to get involved, but it's keeping its options open in case it feels like it has to strike back against Iran. Some argue that the UK is already knee-deep in Operation Epic Fury, such as Jeremy Corbyn, who is the former Labour Party leader in the UK, and the current Member of Parliament for Islington North. Writing for Al Jazeera on March 24th, he claimed that the UK has dragged itself into another by providing the US with access to its military bases. He calls the idea that the UK is allowing the use of these bases for defensive strikes nonsense, and he argues that any bomber that takes off from Diego Garcia and RAF Fairford is engaging in offense and not defense as soon as it drops its load on Iran. Add the HMS Anson being in the Arabian Sea into the mix, and Starmer's Labour Party predecessor is likely to be even more unhappy. Beyond the politicising, the UK also has to deal with the fact that the Iran war is having a direct impact. In addition to ballistic missiles flying in Diego Garcia's direction, the chaos that has been caused in the Strait of Hormuz has been a major contributor to UK companies' costs rising faster than they have in the last 44 years. Sky News reports. With the price of Brent crude having risen by 50% and gas prices jumping up by 90% since the beginning of the operation, Starmer also has to deal with the fact that a situation over which the UK currently exercises no control is actively making life worse for the country's people and businesses. Maybe all of this will be enough to convince Starmer that the UK needs to get involved. At least then, the UK will be able to exert some measure of control. It could work with the Allies to keep the Strait of Hormuz clear. It could do more than offer implied threats about what happens when Iran targets its bases and instead send Tomahawk missiles deep into the regime's territory. The UK is at a tipping point here, and the HMS Anson is the head of the spear that is pointing toward Iran. The only question now is what has to happen for the UK to decide that the spear needs to be jammed into the side of the Iranian regime that is already attacking its bases. While we await the answer to that question, the HMS Anson is still on the prowl, and there is another country that is getting involved in Operation Epic Fury. Ukraine sees an opportunity to build deeper ties in the Middle East and with the US due to Iran's use of Shahid drones in the Strait of Hormuz, and is providing the perfect countermeasure to those drones. Find out how Ukraine is getting involved in Iran by watching our video. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to The Military Show as we cover the potential expansion of the conflict in the Persian Gulf. And thank you as always for watching.